So I was on a first date last week. Terrace, sunshine, we had the whole setup. And for the first, I'd say, 60 minutes, a person across from me, they were basically a broadcast, just on transmit. I learned about their job, their ex, their surprisingly strong opinion on pineapple pizza. And this really detailed breakdown of some family drama involving a cousin I'm definitely never going to meet. My role in this whole performance, well, I was the audience. Simple as that. I nodded, I smiled, I did the required, oh, wow, noises at, the right moments. I think I maybe managed to get one question in, just one. And that just served as a launch pad for another 20-minute story. But the really stunning part, the bit that stuck with me, came right at the very end. After an entire hour of this uninterrupted monologue, they look me dead in the eye, smile really warmly and say, I really enjoyed our exchange. It's so rare to find someone you can have a real conversation with. That's it. It's just hung there in the air. The complete disconnect. Right.
Between their experience, what they thought was a conversation, and mine, which was basically being a human soundboard for someone's autobiography. It was just fascinating. And it made me realize we seem to be living in this age where we're actually terrified of silence, where we mistake all the noise we make for actual connection. And maybe the most common form of communication now is just the verbal hostage situation. You're trapped listening. Okay, so let's unpack this. Because that experience, it really points to something fundamental, maybe even a bit worrying. A shift in how we communicate, this terror of silence, and this total mistake of noise, just sheer volume, for genuine connection. I mean, when someone feels they had a real conversation but did 90% of the talking, it kind of suggests the bar for communication has dropped pretty low, maybe down to just having an audience for your performance.
Yeah. That observation is absolutely central. It's the thread tying together everything we've looked at for today's deep dive. The common theme, the thing that keeps popping up in our material, is this critical difference. It's often ignored, I think. The difference between just talking, which is often broadcasting, like you said, just putting information or thoughts out there, and conversing. Conversing is reciprocal. It's about deep connection. It's a two-way street. So today, we're really diving into the psychological science behind why people feel compelled to monologue like that, and what are the measurable costs, the impact of this superficial communication across, every part of our lives, really. And maybe most importantly, we want to look at the profound power that intentional silence holds as an antidote.
Right. So the mission today is clarity.
Yeah.
How do we get past all that noise and maybe reclaim something more authentic in our communication? And we've got sources looking at everything from those, micro anxieties you feel one-on-one, all the way up to the big picture dysfunction in team meetings, and even that weird isolating effect of being constantly pinged online.
Precisely. We're going to systematically break down how this kind of ego-driven communication hurts us personally first, causing that acute conversational anxiety, trapping us in these self-defeating loops. We'll get into that professionally too, leading to just wasted meetings, lost ideas, lost intellectual capital. It's a real cost. And socially, fostering this digital isolation, even though we're supposedly hyper-connected. By the end of this deep dive, you should have a good handle on specific practices, things like active listening, true presence, tools that can fundamentally transform those interactions.
Okay, let's start with that first date scenario again. The person in my story, they weren't really talking to me, were they? I felt more like they were talking at me. And our sources frame this perfectly, I think. They call it the self-focus trap. It's like when people feel anxious in social situations, they might be physically there, but mentally they've checked out. Because they're not really listening to what's happening outside. Their entire brain power is focused on monitoring themselves.
That internal monitoring, that's the self-focus that really fuels the anxiety cycle. It's a complete shift of your concentration. Anxiety, at its core, is a self-referential state. It's this internal feedback loop where your entire focus gets consumed by checking your own thoughts, your feelings, how you think you're performing, instead of actually engaging with the conversation happening around you. It's why, when people say they felt really anxious during a chat, they often can't remember much of what the other person actually said, because all their mental energy was tied up in that internal self-assessment.
Wow. It sounds paralyzing. You're just constantly running this quality check on yourself, aren't you? Comparing how you're doing in real time against some internal, probably impossible standard.
And that self-monitoring, it inevitably kicks up what cognitive behavioral therapists call hot thoughts, or sometimes distorted core beliefs. These aren't objective facts. They're intensely negative, often catastrophic conclusions that just swirl around in your head. Things like, I'm just bad at meeting people, or I must be so boring, or the really crippling one, oh God, they can totally see I'm anxious. They must think I'm so awkward. You basically mistake your internal fear for external reality.
And we convince ourselves that the only way to be accepted is perfection. This belief takes hold like, I have to perform beautifully, seamlessly, be witty, otherwise I'll be rejected.
Exactly. And because that standard is completely unrealistic, I mean, conversations are messy, they're spontaneous, we develop these elaborate coping mechanisms. The sources call them conversational crutches, or safety-seeking behaviors. Now, these behaviors, they do one thing really well. They temporarily lessen that immediate, awful feeling of anxiety. But, and this is the crucial part, they are totally self-defeating in the long run. They basically guarantee the conversation will go poorly, which then just reinforces that original core belief. See, I told you I was bad at this.
Okay, let's look at those crutches, because I have a feeling anyone listening is going to recognize at least one of these, maybe in themselves, maybe in others.
For sure. The first big one is scripting. This is that obsessive process, right? Thinking of exactly what you're going to say next, maybe even formulating whole paragraphs before the conversation's even properly started. Now, it sounds like good preparation, but it creates this massive cognitive trade-off.
What's the trade-off? Is it just that you kill the spontaneity?
Yeah.
Or are we literally like shutting down the part of our brain that could be listening and present?
It's both, really, but the cognitive cost is the killer. If half your brain's busy pre-writing your next lines, well, that half is completely unavailable for listening, for picking up on nonverbal cues, for engaging organically with what's actually happening right now. So the conversation that results just feels awkward, stiff, like you're reading from a play instead of having a natural exchange, because you're trying to control something that by its very nature has to be organic. It has to be co-created. Scripting means you're prepared for a conversation that isn't actually happening.
Wow. So instead of just reacting naturally, we introduce all this friction, and that friction stops any real flow.
Absolutely. Okay, crutch number 2. Interviewing. This is a classic defense mechanism. You consciously deflect attention away from yourself by just asking question after question after question, relentlessly, and you reveal very little about yourself in return. Now, on the surface, asking questions seems like you're being attentive, right? But in practice, being subjected to a continuous interrogation, it's exhausting for the other person. It creates this really unequal dynamic, and it actively prevents any real connection because the interviewer never offers the vulnerability, the reciprocity that you need to build intimacy. So the interviewer feels safe because they haven't exposed anything, but they end up feeling isolated because, well, they haven't connected.
It's like conversational self-sabotage disguised as politeness. Okay, and the third one is fascinating because it's totally nonverbal. It's covert avoidance.
Yes. Covert avoidance covers all those nonverbal things we do, often unconsciously, to deliberately take the spotlight off ourselves. Physically, it can be subtle, but it's still damaging. Things like speaking really softly, avoiding direct eye contact, or maybe doing that thing where you look just past someone's head, or physically grounding yourself by grasping onto something, clutching your phone for dear life, wrapping your hands tightly around a coffee cup, even crossing your arms really rigidly. The goal is just to appear less expressive, less open, and therefore less available for scrutiny, less of a target. And like the other crutches, it might lower the anxiety temporarily, but it ensures you never actually test the reality, which is that people usually aren't judging you nearly as harshly as you fear.
So these crutches, they basically reinforce the anxiety by making sure the conversations are just bad enough to prove that original negative thought correct. It's a beautifully destructive loop, isn't it? So how do we break out of it? If the root problem is this intense self-focus, then the solution must be about intentionally focusing on the other person, right?
That is absolutely the game changer. Active listening. It's the direct behavioral antidote to the self-focus of that anxiety cycle. It forces a cognitive pivot. You switch from internal monitoring to external engagement.
Right. And when you actually listen with intent, with real curiosity, you force your concentration onto the other person, onto their story. That focused attention, it immediately pushes out that persistent self-monitoring anxiety because your mental energy is going somewhere else. It becomes this really concrete practice in just taking the pressure off yourself.
Exactly. Because active listening demands real cognitive engagement. It requires you to consciously shut out distractions, both the noise in the room and the noise in your head, those scripts. You have to really take in everything that's being communicated. The speaker's words, sure, but also their tone, their pace, their body language, all of it. And crucially, you communicate back that you're hearing them, using those verbal and nonverbal cues like, intentional nodding or making affirming sounds like, uh-huh, or I see.
Okay, that immediately tackles one of the big anxiety triggers for people, the fear of missing something important.
It does. And a really powerful technique here to build confidence and ensure you're actually getting it is paraphrasing. just summarizing what they said back to them, but in your own words. So if I'm hearing you right, kind of thing. This confirms you understood, and it eliminates that worry that you missed the point or got the wrong end of the stick. And look, if you do lose track or you genuinely don't understand their point, which happens all the time in normal conversation, you just ask for clarification. People rarely see that as awkwardness. Actually, most people genuinely enjoy being asked to repeat or elaborate. Why? Because it signals you really want to understand. It makes them feel heard and valued.
And this gives you what you called response relief. That pressure to have the perfect instant comeback or contribution just evaporates.
Precisely. The whole mental shift is from, okay, what brilliant thing am I going to say next, to, okay, how can I fully understand what they are saying right now? You keep inquiring, digging a little deeper into their story, letting the focus stay on them until you feel genuinely ready and able to contribute your own thoughts or maybe shift the topic naturally. By changing your frame from performing to mindfully focusing on the other person right here, right now, you engage more naturally. The conversation actually becomes enjoyable. And that right there breaks the original anxiety loop.
Okay, so we've seen how that debilitating self-focus, that monologue impulse, can really disrupt a simple one-on-one interaction, like my date story. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Imagine the damage that same self-driven impulse does when it's amplified across a whole team or an entire organization. This is where we smash right into the measurable costs of dominance in group settings. And apparently it's a massive drag on productivity.
It really is. Dominance, sociologically speaking, is a behavioral expression of power. And what's kind of alarming is how quickly it shows up. Studies consistently show that within just the first few minutes of strangers interacting, a participation hierarchy starts to emerge, almost instantly. And that hierarchy has fundamental, predictable consequences for how communication works or doesn't work within an organization.
And we can actually track this behavior. It's not just a feeling like, oh, that person talks a lot.
Oh, we can measure it quite rigorously. Researchers have found that dominant individuals tend to exhibit really predictable, active behaviors. They talk more, they move more, they do it more often, and they use a larger range of motion, bigger gestures. And crucially, speaking activity, just the sheer volume, the total time someone spends talking, is the single most robust cue humans use to perceive and assign dominance or power in a group. The person who occupies the airtime is almost instantly seen as the leader, or at least the one with the power, regardless of their actual job title.
Which leads directly to this huge problem called the introvert productivity gap.
Yeah.
Right, especially in settings like meetings where there's a lot of interaction.
Absolutely. This gap comes directly from different ways people process information, different cognitive styles. Introverts typically use a think-to-talk style. They process things internally first, often constructing a pretty detailed, fully formed response in their head before they say it out loud. Now, this creates a natural delay. It might only be a few seconds, but there's a pause while they formulate. Extroverts, on the other hand, often talk to think. They process externally. They actually form and refine their thoughts as they're speaking, out loud, in real time. So extroverts often perceive that brief pause from the introvert as like dead air, a conversational vacuum. And socially, we're often conditioned to fill those vacuums.
So the extrovert jumps in and fills the space that the introvert needed for their internal processing, effectively silencing that valuable internal perspective before it even gets a chance to be heard.
Exactly that. And this leads to meetings being structurally dominated by the external processors, which means you inadvertently waste all the often more detailed, nuanced, or even critical knowledge held by the introverts who think before they speak. You end up having a really high-volume discussion, lots of noise, but it only covers maybe half the necessary information or perspectives.
And when only one or two loud voices dominate everything, the whole group runs the risk of falling into groupthink, which sounds potentially catastrophic.
Oh, groupthink is incredibly dangerous. Because it's not just about people feeling unheard or having hurt feelings, it's about making genuinely irrational or dysfunctional decisions. It means the group reaches a consensus based on conformity, maybe wanting to please the leader or just wanting the meeting to end, rather than on a thorough look at all the information. If those detailed perspectives, those cautious critiques, that specialized knowledge from the whole team gets lost, or worse, actively withheld, well, the decision you make will be weaker, more prone to bias, and ultimately probably won't work. High stress, tight deadlines, and a leader who's very directive, those are the classic ingredients that make groupthink almost inevitable.
So the danger isn't just the volume of the dominant person. It's the resulting organizational cost of silence, of people withholding their voice, their ideas.
Ineffective conversations, where key ideas are withheld, almost certainly block effective organizational change or innovation. It's a direct barrier. And people stay silent, not usually because they have nothing useful to add, but because they perceive risk. That risk might be personal fear, looking foolish, facing rejection, enduring awkward conflict, or it could be due to institutional intimidation, especially the fear of criticizing or even just questioning an idea that came from someone higher up the chain.
Yeah, we have a really powerful example of this chilling effect in the sources, don't we? From a legal firm.
Yes, the case study involving a leader, let's call him Frank. He said he valued input, innovative feedback, all that. He claimed he wanted a learning context. But his actions actually created an evaluative context, which is very different. So in one instance, a junior associate offers an idea. Maybe it's a bit rough around the edges. Frank shoots it down instantly, declares something like, "I know a good insight when I hear one, and this isn't it. Ouch." Then later, another associate presents a really polished idea. Frank celebrates it publicly. That's it. That's the #1 strategy going forward.
Wow. The impact of that contrast must be devastating. Frank might think he's just giving feedback, but by slapping the grade on it, good insight versus not it, he's basically set up a public grading system for ideas.
Precisely. And that behavior raises the perceived bar for contributing to an impossibly high level. Other associates immediately start self-censoring. They think, okay, is my idea good enough? Is it an A-grade idea? Is it worth the risk of being publicly labeled as not an insight? And inevitably, they err on the side of caution, which means silence. And that loss of voice means the organization misses out on all those crucial early-stage ideas, the ones that need a bit of group nurturing to develop. Often, those are the most radical and ultimately beneficial ones.
So you end up with a culture where silence feels like the safest personal strategy, which is the opposite of what Frank said he wanted. Now, contrast that with the philosophy from the CEO of Netflix. They took a dramatically different view on silence, didn't they?
Yeah. Yes. The Netflix leadership essentially reframed the whole concept of silence at work. They went so far as to label withholding your professional opinion as an act of disloyalty to the company. Their reasoning was pretty straightforward. If you have information and insight, a critical assessment that could genuinely help the company succeed, and you choose to keep it to yourself, you're essentially prioritizing your own personal comfort or fear over the success of the organization. That shift completely transforms silence from being a cautious, maybe understandable, retreat into being a strategic failure.
That is a powerful reframing. Okay, so if silence, or rather withholding voice, is so detrimental, how can leaders actually encourage productive voice while also, maybe counterintuitively, integrating intentional silence?
It requires concrete, practical actions. Things you can do to manage the conversational flow differently. First, write it. Instead of just jumping into verbal brainstorming where usually only the fastest talkers or processors win, ask participants to spend a few minutes writing down their answers, ideas, or critiques first. Silently, individually. This forces everyone, especially the introverts, to formulate their thoughts before the floor opens up. It ensures their input gets captured and respected. It deliberately slows down that rapid, sometimes chaotic flow of just advocating for positions.
That makes so much sense. That structural change really honors the introvert's need to think before talking. It levels the playing field a bit.
Exactly. Second, zip it. This is for the leaders mainly. You have to consciously embrace silence after you ask a question. There's this really common cultural impulse, especially in Western business, to fill any pause immediately. We feel awkward. But a productive pause, maybe just 5-10 seconds even, gives those internal processors the cognitive space they need to actually formulate and then speak up. Leaders have to resist that powerful urge to jump back in themselves or to instantly rephrase the question because they assume nobody has an answer. Often that silence is the sound of people thinking. You have to respect that space.
And the third piece is about the behavior modeled right from the top, isn't it?
Absolutely crucial. Leaders must model inquiry and humility. This means making explicit statements about how much you value different perspectives, even dissenting or critical ones. And then you have to back that up with genuine curiosity, asking really artful, open-ended questions like, what other possibilities are there that we haven't even considered yet? Or what aspects of this plan might we be overlooking? What are the potential downsides? When a leader genuinely values and maybe even rewards input that challenges the prevailing view, they normalize challenging assumptions. That ensures you get a healthy, dynamic mix of both advocacy pushing an idea forward and inquiry questioning that idea thoroughly.
Which means we need to value the time dedicated not just to talking, but to that active, silent processing.
Exactly. Leaders need to set explicit norms for processing. Make it okay, even expected. Processing means active listening with the primary goal of deeply understanding the complexity of what's being said. This isn't passive downtime. It's using your mental energy to stay engaged but non-judgmental. It often requires that intentional cognitive distance, that silence, before you jump in with your own advocacy or inquiry. By deliberately creating and valuing the space for intentional silence, you unlock the full intellectual power of the group. You prevent both the dominance of the few and the dangers of groupthink.
Okay, so we've traced this noise issue from the micro-anxiety of the monologue all the way to the macro-dysfunction of the meeting room. The common thread seems to be this deep reluctance to just stop, listen, and actually honor the silence. But what about the noise we actively invite into our lives, like 24/7? That constant ping, ping, ping of digital connectivity. I remember when the internet was first really taking off, the big prediction was it would annihilate distance, connect us all seamlessly. A global village. But instead, this weird paradox seems to have emerged. We're more connected technologically than any humans in history, yet studies keep suggesting many people feel profoundly more isolated. What's going on there?
It really is a connection paradox. And it seems to hinge entirely on the quality of the interaction, not the quantity. It's kind of like being in a huge, crowded party where everyone's shouting quick, superficial hellos, hey, how are ya? Great. But absolutely no one is sitting down for a proper, sustained, deep conversation. And the data on this is pretty sobering. Multiple studies show a significant correlation between heavy social media use and increased feelings of social isolation, loneliness, even psychological distress.
And this isn't just older folks lamenting the good old days. It's prevalent even among young people who've literally never known a world without these platforms.
Yeah, that really speaks to the nature of the interaction itself, doesn't it? It seems driven by this kind of superficiality and this constant pressure to perform, to curate the highlight reel. The digital landscape is almost structurally designed to incentivize that. Think about it. The constant quest for external validation. How many likes, how many comments, how many shares. It encourages users to project this completely idealized, overwhelmingly positive, carefully curated highlight reel of their life. And when other people consume this endless stream of polished perfection, they often end up feeling isolated or inadequate by comparison. That classic FOMO fear of missing out. The feeling that everyone else is having these amazing experiences effortlessly, and you're not. Plus, the sheer instantaneity, the low-friction nature of digital pings and messages, it diminishes the perceived need for deeper, more time-consuming, more effortful face-to-face interactions. The quick digital fix kind of replaces the need for sustained, messy, real presence.
So we end up engaging constantly in this type of communication that serves very little actual informational purpose, but carries immense social weight. You mentioned exchanges like kukusaba earlier, these quick, low-content check-ins. What's the term for these kinds of interactions?
Those are all examples of what sociolinguists call phatic communication. The term refers specifically to communication where the primary function isn't to convey information, but rather social upkeep. Maintaining the connection itself, it stems from a really deep, probably evolutionary human need. The need to establish and maintain social bonds, to signal affiliation, regardless of how mundane or low content the actual message is.
So the content itself is almost trivial, just eating some dark chocolate, stuck in traffic again, or that classic, almost content-free check-in. It doesn't really inform you of anything significant, but it performs this vital social function of just signaling presence. I'm still here.
Exactly. It performs a critical role in affirming group membership and relationship continuity. These phatic posts, whether it's a quick emoji reply, an obligatory Facebook like on a friend's vacation photo, or even something like the old poke function, they're all signals. They indicate recognition, validation, continued online presence. Hey, I'm still around, thinking of you. They foster this feeling of continuous, low-level intimacy just by maintaining constant, low-effort connectedness. You could say it's a strategy where high frequency of contact tries to compensate for low intimacy of contact.
That poke button example really nails this low-effort, high-impact social signaling thing, doesn't it?
Oh, it's a textbook example of phatic function. A poke was this highly visible yet incredibly low-pressure way of getting or giving attention. Users often interpreted it as, hey, I was online, saw your name, thought of you. Pretty benign, but it simultaneously implicitly signaled, and I'm too busy or maybe too lazy or perhaps this relationship isn't quite important enough to actually write you a real substantive message right now. It was this super easy, non-committal gesture used just to reinforce the boundary of a relationship without investing any actual substantive effort.
But there's a really critical sociological implication here, isn't there? This constant focus on non-substantive social upkeep, it ties into this institutional avoidance of conflict or real dissent online.
That is definitely the darker side of structurally encouraged phatic communication. Social networks, fundamentally, are designed at a feature level to maximize user time and engagement, keep people scrolling, keep people clicking. So features like having a universally present like button, but deliberately not having an equally visible and easy dislike or I disagree button. Well, these design choices tend to promote what researchers call mutual conformistic harmony.
So the very architecture of the platform subtly nudges us all towards agreement, or at least avoiding disagreement.
It absolutely does. This structural setup minimizes conflict, avoids social tensions, prevents uncomfortable disagreements, which is great for keeping user numbers high and the platform activity humming along smoothly. Good for business. But by prioritizing this kind of engineered harmony, the platforms inevitably weaken the authenticity of the engagement. We end up using the phatic function, clicking like, setting that superficial, looks great, comment primarily to reinforce existing relationships and conform to group norms, even when we might have nothing substantive or maybe even something critical to say. We essentially sacrifice potential relational depth and genuine dialogue for easy digital compliance. That silence about meaningful disagreements is just as damaging online in its own way as it is in the boardroom.
Okay, so we've journeyed across the whole spectrum, haven't we? From the micro-anxiety stopping us from listening one-on-one to the dominant stopping others from speaking up in groups, and now this structural digital noise that seems to prevent genuine connection online. The core issue we keep coming back to again and again seems to be this fundamental lack of real presence. Now, if active listening is the essential practice, the technique that can stop that personal anxiety spiral, how do we move beyond just technique? How do we cultivate what feels like the ultimate level of genuine human presence?
That ultimate level, well, that's what we can call deep listening. And it really does go well beyond the technical mechanics of active listening. You know, the paraphrasing, the nodding, the mirroring body language. Those are useful tools, but this is deeper. Deep listening is more of a practice, almost spiritual in its quality. It requires a radical inner stillness, a genuine openness, and this mindful attention, not only to the person's words and their body language, but very specifically to the space between their words, to their pauses, to their silence.
And this isn't some new pop psychology concept, is it? This idea is rooted in philosophies that are much older.
Much, much older, absolutely. The idea of listening with your entire being, it's ancient. You find it in indigenous cultures worldwide. For example, among Aboriginal Australian communities, there's this concept encapsulated in the practice of Didiri. It translates roughly to inner, deep listening and a quiet, still awareness. In other traditions, you might hear it called compassionate listening. But the fundamental principle is the same. You listen with only one single purpose: to help the other person empty their heart, to help them feel profoundly seen and heard.
And this deep listening, it's applied universally. Even if what the person is saying seems, flawed or maybe bitter or based on a complete misperception of reality.
Yes. That's the radical part. The purpose is not to correct them or advise them or jump in with your own brilliant solution, which is where most of us stumble, myself included sometimes. The purpose is pure compassion and presence. You just keep listening because you understand that by listening in this incredibly non-judgmental way, you are giving that person the space, the validation, the safety they need to actually process their own suffering. You're essentially giving them a chance to suffer less just by holding that space. You're simply fully present, witnessing, and crucially, not adding your own mental noise to their situation.
Wow. Deep listening, then, it sounds like it's truly a gift that nourishes all three entities involved in that interaction.
It really is a kind of relational triple win. First, obviously, it nourishes the recipient. When someone feels genuinely deeply listened to, it cultivates this profound, almost indelible sense of self-worth. That foundational feeling of, my voice matters. I matter. I am someone important enough to command this level of attention. For children, experiencing this is absolutely critical for forming secure attachment and ensuring healthy emotional development down the line.
Okay, and second, it benefits the listener too.
Absolutely. By fully committing to that state of presence and inner stillness, the listener is, in a way, made whole again. That's how one Aboriginal elder described the experience of practicing Didiri. It pulls the listener out of their own constant internal chatter, that noise machine we talked about. It offers them respite, anchors them entirely in the present moment, which is essentially a powerful form of mindfulness practice in itself.
And third, it profoundly sustains the relationship itself.
The research here consistently backs up this ancient wisdom. Long-term studies, particularly those looking at married couples over decades, demonstrate this powerfully. The roots of a lasting, intimate, resilient relationship are found in deep listening and loving, non-critical speech. Conversely, the specific absence of responsive listening, when couples fall into patterns of emotional criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling, just shutting down, that correlates extremely strongly with negative outcomes, most notably divorce. So deep listening isn't just some touchy-feely nice to have. It's a fundamental investment in intimacy, trust, and relational resilience.
Okay, so if we accept this is the gold standard, this deep listening, how do we, living in this age of constant distraction and noise, actually start to build this muscle? It sounds difficult.
It takes conscious effort, absolutely. And often it feels difficult because we have to actively override years, maybe decades, of conditioning that taught us the opposite, taught us to interrupt, to fix, to always be waiting for our turn to speak. So, tip number 1, connect with yourself first. You really have to practice slowing down, turning your attention inward, and just being present with your own internal landscape, your thoughts, your emotions, and especially your bodily sensations. Where do you feel that tension? If you can't listen compassionately to your own internal weather, you will inevitably end up projecting that unmanaged internal chaos onto the external conversation.
That brings us right back to the self-focus trap we started with. Mastering that internal stillness is like the prerequisite for offering external stillness to someone else.
Exactly right. Okay, tip number 2, make time. Deep listening cannot happen effectively on the fly, squeezed in between checking your email and answering a text message. It just can't. You need to build regular, intentional, and protected time into your schedule specifically for true presence. Maybe that's a once a week, absolutely no distraction check-in with a close friend or your partner. Or maybe it's dedicating meal times to being fully mindfully present with your family, phones away. The structure helps ensure the practice actually happens.
And the most obvious step, perhaps, but maybe the hardest one in our multitasking world, minimize distractions.
It sounds simple, but it's crucial. Deep listening requires your full mind and your full heart to show up. It cannot be treated like just another tab open in your mental browser. This means consciously putting the phone down, completely away, turning off the TV, shutting down the computer notifications. We even see data showing that parental distraction by phones takes a measurable toll on young children's language acquisition and emotional development. That just highlights how critical minimizing these seemingly small distractions is for the quality of connection in absolutely every context.
And finally, managing that almost overwhelming urge that pops up, the urge to jump in, to give advice, to solve the problem for the person speaking.
Yes, notice the urge to fix. You have to cultivate an awareness. Pay acute attention to that moment when you feel tension rising in your body or anxiety bubbling up, or just that powerful desire to interrupt, change the topic, or offer your solution. These feelings are clear signals. They're the noise of your internal state trying to assert control over the conversation. When that tendency arises, the practice is to silently and non-judgmentally just name it. Okay, there's my ego wanting to fix this. Or, that's the feeling of my impatience. And then gently, compassionately, just return your focus back to the speaker, back to listening, back to the silence. It's a journey, honestly. It requires endless awareness and this constant willingness to just recommit to presence again and again, resisting that quick, easy fix of adding more noise.
So what we've really explored today is this whole continuum of communication quality, haven't we? On one end, you've got that exhausting monologue like my date story and the superficial digital ping, all that noise we create, often out of anxiety, maybe a desire for dominance or just sheer convenience, noise that's almost structurally designed to protect us from vulnerability. And then way over on the other end, you find this profound stillness, this deep attentiveness of real listening, whether that's happening on a date, in a crucial meeting, or just in a quiet check-in with someone you care about. It feels like the movement away from just being a passive soundboard, just a receptacle for other people's noise, and towards intentional engagement, towards honoring silence. It's maybe the most difficult shift, but perhaps the most rewarding investment you can make in the quality of your relationships, and maybe even the quality of your own life.
I think the most challenging element, really, of modern communication isn't the technology we use or even the complexity of the words we choose to speak. It might just be the simple, maybe even terrifying realization that to truly, authentically connect with another human being, we first have to master the art of silence and presence within ourselves.